I welcome you all to the second episode of the IILM Samvaad Series. It's a multidisciplinary forum that we have curated to discuss contemporary issues and critical ideas that usually come up in academia. So the US election has concluded, and we all know that Donald Trump is back with a bang. While there are multiple questions to ponder over, we were here at IILM University very curious to understand and debate how Trump's second presidency might impact the global trade. And given the hype that Elon Musk is joining Trump's cabinet and acting possibly like a shadow vice president, what would be the likely impact on the tech world? Let me introduce the speakers, the panelists for today. So we have Mr. Nandagopal Rajan. He's the Chief Operating Officer of the Indian Express Digital. He was earlier editor, New Media, and business head of IndianExpress.com. We have Mr. Anil Shashi. He is National Business Editor with the Indian Express and writes on business and finance issues. So we welcome you both to IILM University, Greater Noida. And I'm joined by Dr. Akhil Damodaran. He's the Dean of the School of Management at IILM University to moderate the session along with me because of his well-known interest in technology. So my first question, and I believe a question that most of us, we were having informal conversations, and the thing that popped up is the tariff war that Trump has begun. When he announced that there will be a 60% tariff on Chinese imports, and when he mentioned that on BRICS countries it would be on 100% just because BRICS is exploring an alternative currency. So I would request you, Mr. Anil, to please start with your take on the tariff war and its impact possibly on global trade.
Go back in time to see where Donald Trump, or why he's fixated with tariffs. And generally, consistency is something that you do not sort of, associate with Trump on most issues. But on this one thing, he has been very consistent. In the 1980s, he'd apparently come out with full-page newspaper ads in 3 newspapers, the NYT, Washington Post, and the Boston Globe. He spent close to $1 million then to essentially campaign against Japan and the fact that Japan was having a free ride. It was taking US consumers for it was gaining primarily on behalf of consumers in the US selling Japanese cars, etc. He pointed to the fact that the deficit with Japan was growing and how Japan was ripping off America by virtue of a sweetheart deal that the administration at that time had sort of ostensibly offered Japan. That script hasn't changed. The only thing that changed are the countries. Then became West Germany. Then subsequently you had other countries. You had Saudi Arabia in between. And now, China, Europe. The targets have changed, but on tariffs, he's been fairly consistent. The 2 things here. One, the way Trump has packaged the whole narrative on tariffs is that someone else will pay for the tariffs and that country will be penalized. We will penalize them by imposing these tariffs. But the problem there is that tariffs are fairly regressive. Tariffs are okay if they're applied on specified goods when you see dumping action, that is a country selling, say, steel below the cost of production in the US, and you apply an anti-dumping duty and that might work. But tariffs applied across the board tend to be regressive because someone pays those tariffs. Typically, it is the consumers in that country, the country that applies it. It will be American consumers who pay the tariffs for goods that come in. It is true that some goods will get less competitive because by virtue of the tariffs being there, which might spur on domestic manufacturers who might gain somewhat in the interim. The long experience that has shown that whenever that sort of stuff happens, domestic producers who gain on behalf of, essentially on account of these tariffs, tend to hike prices because there's no competition. So from an academic perspective, there is this great book written by two trade economists. It's called Trade Wars Are Class Wars. And that is what it actually is. Inevitably, it will be the same base that actually voted Trump to power. The same guys who were so harried about inflation that they thought regime change was needed, despite the fact that the American economy is doing really well. They have its employment is almost full up. They're growing at a trend line growth of about 3% as compared to 1.5-2% for Europe. They have weathered the post-pandemic inflation crisis well. They've managed what's called a soft landing, in the sense they've not gone into recession, which is typically what happens when you have a rate hike cycle that the central bank engages, and they've not really fallen into recession. They've actually bounced back. They're in a great position, but there was this perceived notion of people, the common man, having to sort of bear high inflation, high periods of inflation on essential commodities. And maybe that is one reason why the voters voted the way they voted. Now Trump has come in riding on that vote. He's come in riding on an economy that is already doing very well. Now he plans to impose tariffs, plans to inflate an economy that is already inflated. All of that could turn out to be counterproductive. So, the long and the short of it is that it might be easy to say something when you're not in power. But when you get into power and you realize that there are other balances that are needed, I think that's where he might have to recalibrate.
Technology might very likely be the new oil. Because money is there and power is there. So do you think it will come true in the case of the Department of Government Efficiency, this Dodge thing that Elon Musk will be running? And with your answer, I would request Akhil to ask a follow-up question.
Yeah, so that the new oil we have heard for many things. So his technology, the new oil, I don't know. I think this DOG thing is very vague right now, right? And also there is a lot of ethical questions in place also, right? Like, a person who is the most powerful businessman in that country also running whatever. Like, I don't know how it's going to pan out, right? Like, so I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. Like, yeah, because again, this Department of Government Efficiency is something nobody has any idea about, right? And if you see, the thing is, you just need to go to Twitter to figure out. It's basically like they don't think, they tweet, and I can't say tweet, but yeah, so everything is real time on a Twitter timeline, and there itself they are contradicting themselves like every single day. So we really don't know. I don't know whether I should comment on what that's going to. But technology, again, it's going to see impact of tech in US is already very high, right? Like we talk about impact of WhatsApp in a country like India, for instance, right? Similarly, I think US has gone into overdrive. We don't even talk about TikTok, but what's happening on TikTok can actually change things on the ground, right? In US right now, and again, I think Musk being on Twitter, on X, and tweeting real time on a daily basis. And I don't know how many of you realized it. He's completely changed the algorithm. The algorithm is there just to project him, right? I've been one of the early adopters of Twitter and been a very active user. I just can't go there anymore, right? Like, and a lot of people have moved here, but you have to go there to see what's happening, right? Sitting in India also, you don't see anything about India anymore. You just see, right? And it is there is hardly any positive thing happening if you're looking at X, for instance. So it's completely changed the algorithm, right? So how that can like change the narrative in a country where we don't realize that in a way Musk and Trump are also competitors.
Yes.
Right? Because they both own social media platforms now. Right? So this is going into a very weird kind of a space where the entire narrative can now be controlled. Right? thankfully, even now, US more or less has an independent media, right? So, this is very uncharted waters we are entering.
Trump has come and he has decided that he is going to deregulate the AI as a regulation perspective. But at the same time, his focus is more on making sure that AI becomes part of a defense mechanism. When you say AI regulation and a general global perspective, do you think it's really a concern to focus on? Second thing, how it is going to impact the US in terms of the second question which I asked.
Interestingly, Elon Musk also had a completely opposite view on AI till he had his own AI company, right? So again, with this, we don't know, for instance, that is it going to be Trump's thinking or is it going to be Musk's thinking? And again, it is not just Musk. There is a lot of big tech or people in big tech also backing Trump in different ways, right? And AI is not something that you can wish away anymore. It is there. So how it's going to happen? But I think AI regulation again is going to happen in one way or the other. It's already happening. A lot of it is actually self-regulation. If you've seen, um, I saw it real time happening when Bing, I had got early access to Bing when it was not available to consumers. What was available then, and the day they announced that it's available for people, how they completely choked it. It's so what you are actually seeing is a very anything you see Gemini, Chat GPT, or and Bing Copilot. All of them have they maybe 10-15% of what they're capable of, because if you let them run on 100% EA, then you really don't know what all can happen. So a lot of self-regulation is happening. A lot of regulation is happening at a global level. So I don't think US can really stay out of it and say no, here it's going to be here. But there are again larger things at play here, in US, because they have this entire thing that about free speech also. Does free speech apply to AI, and will you let AI just run riot? In that sense, it's very complicated. So AI coming to defense, I'm not very clear about. So I won't talk.
Probably, like, because now you can have these drones which are sort of like which will have an intelligence of its own and kind of can some military tactics that
No, which is already there. Like that's not really new, right? Like if you see what's happening in Ukraine, or a lot of these, they have to take calls real time, right?
I already have a question on TikTok because he keeps going back and forth on TikTok for years that he would ban it. But before I come to it, I just have a question to you uh, on the same feat that he keeps going to and fro with different alliances. So he was all for BRICS for very long, and now you see him attacking BRICS just straight away. With whom already I believe US has a trade deficit with if you take all the BRICS countries together. So what do you anticipate a Trump 2.0 would look like with regards to alliances and these spaces like, let's say, Quad? We talked, we had different symposiums on Quad, and there's so much of anticipation on Quad being like this pole that could probably oppose a Chinese expansionism in the Indo-Pacific. So what would be your take on a possibility of Trump going to and fro with regards to these very crucial security economic alliances in the around the world?
Look, with the disclaimer that I'm not the subject expert on this, but I would say that his attack on BRICS was on one very pointed, specific reference point, which was a threat that if the BRICS were to think of an alternate currency, then the US would, retaliate by using tariffs. So it was a very sort of specific reference, not to the grouping as a whole, but to the possibility of the BRICS sort of, even looking at the potential of maybe having an alternate currency. The reference point for this was a discussion that had happened at the recent BRICS summit, where China and Russia had sort of indicated that they could be looking at this. There's also a reason why he's saying this. Okay, the tariffs bit could just be posturing, because tariffs is this one trick pony that he uses for everything, because he feels that the US, as the world's biggest consumer, can use that as a leverage to set everyone right. Uh, Given the fact that almost everybody who has a surplus with the US in trade tends to lose if tariffs were to be imposed. The reason why he's probably talked about the currency issue is because the US has been spending beyond its means for the last 50 years. But they've managed this, and they've not turned into a Zimbabwe or an Argentina, because the US dollar is the reserve currency of the world. They can print the dollar. It will not be as inflationary as it would be in India if India were to print rupees. They all of trade in the world, a bulk of it, I mean, maybe about 70% of trade would be denominated in dollars. Because of that, the US has these inherent advantages that, if it is threatened going forward, there could be repercussions to the way the US has managed its fiscal deficit so far. They've never struggled. You could have a Congress sort of stalemate on clearing the budget bill or the spending plan for the next quarter, but it's never come to an issue like it would be in an Argentina or a Zimbabwe or any of these crisis-ridden countries where they faced a currency crisis. That the US would face that kind of a situation ever. That it's never happened. But over the last presidency, Biden presidency, one thing that happened post the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they had stopped Russia from accessing its dollar deposits and some of the deposits that held in other countries, and that sort of set in motion a movement around the world, across central banks, including the RBI, to buy gold as a hedge to holding dollars, because you never know if tomorrow the US were to decide that I did not like this particular action that you took, and so I'm freezing your reserves. They overturned what was a broad global consensus, and that set the cat among the pigeons, and countries have changed the way they're holding their central bank reserves, including in India. The second thing, if it were to happen, that is, if 5 countries with large enough economies, the BRICS together comprises about 40% of the world population. There's a lot of intra-BRICS trade. 2 of the most populous countries in there. The second largest economy in the world is in that grouping. The 4th largest economy is in that grouping. If they were to decide, and it's a big if, to start transacting bilateral, Russia and China are already doing it. The US currency as a reserve would face some challenges, and I think he's preempting it. He's just saying, don't even think about it, and that's the way he is. He always takes a maximalistic position to try and sort of ward everyone off the risks of even contemplating such a thing, which is what he's done. He's really anti-global trade. He's against trade alliances. That's been his sort of very consistent position, and it followed from that. But you mentioned the Quad and the AUKUS and some of the other things, and Jen Saab would know that it is, in his last administration, he was sort of advised by fairly sane individuals, 4-star generals like John F. Kelly and others, who I'm sure would have given him advice on what America's strategic interests are and how that cannot be conflated with with the trade issues. So on trade, he has taken a very, very extremist kind of position, but on others, he's generally gone with the flow. He's not disrupted it, and in all of these, the common enemy really, or the enemy that he's looking at this point in time, might be China, and to some extent Iran, but it'll be China. So I would be so Quad or AUKUS, so all of these sort of bodies are essentially, they've not explicitly said it, but China is is in the is the eventual target. I would be even though now the picks that he's had of people who would be advising him are not as sound. I'm not very sure how this would pan out. This would be a challenge. This would be something that we've never seen. Pete Hegsworth as the head of defense secretary. I mean, if the confirmation happens, would be a bizarre choice. We've succeeding General Austin, Lloyd Austin. So these are things that we have to see and watch. But so far, on strategic issues, at least the administration has been sort of very resolute in steering him away from, his general behavior on a lot of these things. Will it happen going forward? But that's something we'd have to see.
So I am back to the TikTok question. So we've seen Trump say in August 2024 that Google has been very bad. They've been very irresponsible, and I have a feeling that Google is going to be close to shut down. Then we also saw this, there is a litigation going on against Google by the US Department of Justice. And on the side, we also see Biden administration had given the TikTok's owner time until January 19th, a day before Trump would take office, to sell the platform or face a ban. So there's these two big tech giants, TikTok and Google, facing litigation and possible close down, probably not complete shutdown, but some sort of a ban or a, So what do you think the likely impact could be on the technology front from a consumer perspective?
Yeah, so this is not new. It's been going on for a long time with TikTok as well as with Google. It's not just with Google. It's with big tech on this consolidation of power, right? With a few companies, right? So, and again, there is precedent to that. It also in the US with Microsoft, happening. And so with Google, it's primarily around Chrome and maybe Android, right? So that they have to sell Chrome to somebody else, and then they also have to get out with the kind of deals that they have, where Google becomes the default search engine on an Apple device, for instance. In fact, I was setting up a new device yesterday, a Chinese device. There it gives you almost 12 search engine options as your default search engine on the device, right? It gives you 12 options, which was never there on an Android device earlier. So they are also trying to hedge it. But what is in the works is that Chrome will have to be sold to a separate company, right? Now you look at that from a market like India, right? In India, I think it's about 94% Chrome. Nobody uses anything else, right? There was a time when you could not access a government site without Internet Explorer. It's not like that anymore, right? So Chrome has complete, and which also means that in a market where over 90% people use Android phones, in this is the primary browser, right? And if you've seen how devices have changed over the past few years, they are browser first. We don't realize it. Browser is the most used software on any device, be it a laptop or a phone, right? So, and removing that, so basically Google's users touch point with Google goes down drastically, right, by about 75%, by any logic. And that how that plays out, it of course has a huge revenue impact for Google. It has a huge user impact, because if all of us are so used to using Chrome as our primary browser and all of that, the experience. See, the thing is, if you have used Chrome and you then start trying to use a search engine like DuckDuckGo, you will use it for one day max, or you have to use it like meditation. Okay, I will not use, I'm going vegan from tomorrow, that kind of a thing. It is not easy, right? Because there is so much of muscle memory built in how you use, how easy it is. So that ease is, so what happens when this sort of, fragmentation of big tech which is being talked about in a big way, is going to happen is that a lot of ease of use goes, right? We talk about how Google has so much data on us, right? And then we are talking about, okay, it's going to serve me ads, but it's also serving you a lot of good things, which you don't realize. But a lot of your experience is because it is able to understand your user behavior and preempt a lot of use cases that you have, and that's saving you time. And the other thing is, when a lot of these things go away, right? So this is also monetized by Google makes money because it has so much understanding of you. If that understanding becomes lesser, right, then they might start going into a paid model, right? So from a consumer perspective, though it has a lot of advantages, it's going to have some serious disadvantages too, right? Especially in a market like India, right? Maybe in the US they can afford to have a paid browser, and there have been many experiments with paid browsers which haven't worked so far, but that's something people have experimented with. In a market like India, it's going to be really tough, right? Because then if Chrome is not there, or Chrome is let's say owned by somebody else, which is not as ubiquitous as using it on an Android device, that how it pans out is going to be. On TikTok, again, so we sort of showed the path, right, on what to do with TikTok, right? But what US is also saying is that you either sell it or you unplug the China angle, right? Which the TikTok founder has always been saying that, hey, we are not a Chinese company. We are I am Singapore based, right? So that now see also his best chance might be before January 19th.
Yes.
Right now, let's not look at it from Trump as a protectionist. I'm sure, like um, Musk would love to own TikTok, or parts of it, or whatever. Right? See, in India, I don't know how many of you have used TikTok during its peak, which was the first year of the pandemic, right? In fact, I have the story about TikTok from early 2019. And because I was traveling across India, because we have a lot of offices, I was setting up languages and all. Everybody knew about TikTok in Chennai and Tamil and rural Tamil Nadu or Kerala and all of that. Nobody knew about TikTok in Bombay and Delhi, right? Then I met the TikTok founder once, and he said, "See, yeah." He said, "How are we different, right? What's the primary difference between us and EA?" He said there are two differences. One is, all the social media platforms right now were built for desktop, and then they moved to mobile. We never had a desktop version. We always built for mobile. The other thing is, we were built for Chinese, which means we were not built for English, right? There was a time, if you use TikTok in India during the early days, English was not an option. So if you were not multilingual, which most Indians are not, you could not actually log in. You could not log in only with English. You had to select a Malayalam or a Tamil or a Bangla or a Hindi to log in initially, right? So that is how they captured the market. So they understand the market in a completely different way compared to so it's a yeah. And see, if TikTok would have been way more successful in India than it is in the US, right? And TikTok, I don't know if you realize, TikTok has a significant impact now on the US economy. A lot of people that's what they do. They make money. And you see the creator economy is so big in India already. TikTok would have given it much more. Because, again, one more example that I remember from around that time, 2019, is of this guy being mobbed at which, I think, Chennai airport. He was a TikToker. Hey, he was, people were, so you already had, and people broke down when TikTok was slow. And Reels, even YouTube Shorts, wouldn't have been as big as it is in India now if TikTok was there, right? And all the there were at least 4 or 5 Indian competitors that came up as soon as TikTok got show. Where are they now? There's none of them alive, right? So it's so there is there is a huge opportunity for American companies with TikTok going away, right? Because suddenly what TikTok has built will immediately go into that other platforms, right? Yeah.
While we are at it, just to add, what would be the impact on Zuckerberg? He was hated by Trump for his whole first presidency. Now he's silent and like a saint-like figure in the whole Silicon Valley. But do you think there would be an impact, a continued targeting on Zuckerberg, Meta?
See, he is not that. He's a pale shadow of what he used to be, right? Because if you see Meta's impact is not what it used to be. Facebook is not what, Instagram is really big. WhatsApp isn't a very, how do I put it? Maybe it's not a very extrovertish platform, right? It's a very B2B, peer to peer kind of platform. So a lot of stuff happens there, but it's not going to, people are not going to realize it's happening there. So I think he's not what and he's also, see, he's made a couple of very bad bets, right? With Meta, changing the name to Meta, and this entire, metaverse that he betted on, completely gone, right? Nobody's even talking. It might come back, but it's completely gone. He has also found success in some other things, right? His AI play so far is quite successful, and his move towards VR has been very successful. We don't see that in India because India is not one market where they sell, but they really own the VR market globally with Oculus and with one of the great investments that he did, right? So he is also, he's actually diversified himself from, going beyond that, and so it is. And also one other thing that he did long back 2016, with how, how people blamed Facebook for Trump coming to power, right? With the kind of targeted ad campaigns Trump was running and all of that. Post that, what Facebook has done is Facebook has taken away, um, as in, it's very difficult for political kind of content to work on Facebook, right? So if you look at it in a different way, uh, Facebook cannot impact an election anymore, and that's a very conscious decision that they took, that we'll dial down on all of that, right? So he's not a real threat to Trump or Musk in that sense, is my understanding. Where now, the other angle here that's going to happen in the social media front, which is where maybe you would see Zuckerberg and all these people stand up and raise their voice, is that, if this entire push towards free speech comes up, right? I don't know how many of you have been on X and spent time, like, as an exercise, as an academic exercise, create a new handle. Don't use your old handle. Create a new handle, and don't follow anybody. See what the feed throws up for you, right? It is complete, like, you can't, no, you can't, so if, yeah, it's really bad. Let's put it that way, right? And it's all kinds of way, because they think we are not going to regulate anything, be it hate speech, be it porn, it all comes into your feed, right? And without any, you following anybody, it just pushes into your feed. Now, if they're going to say that you cannot regulate content on any platform, that is where I think Zuckerberg and all, because that's where they have invested hugely over the past decade, right? That is where I think YouTube and all these people will stand up and say that no, you cannot let it be a free for all, right? Because if you look at it from a very business way, people would tend to go to a free for all platform than a regulated platform.
Recently, if you look at, I think like 7, 8 months back, I got an article where it was said that, there is no way forward for cryptocurrency, how it's going to be. But all of a sudden, Paul Atkin has become the head of SEC. First of all, that itself is something which we don't understand, how somebody who is talking about cryptocurrency becomes the head of SEC. And after that, Bitcoin has already crossed the record of 1 lakh, or almost $1 lakh, and almost all the world is now talking about the same cryptocurrency. Now it's going to be changing the world. So, two questions. First, do you think cryptocurrency is coming back as an alternative to the regular currency? That question, which I think I asked you in the podcast itself, that time it was, but it was at that time we know that the answer was going to be slightly negative, but now the world is changing. And secondly, how India is going to take it up, because now I think most of the agencies who are not talking about Bitcoin at all, they all come up again and saying that, the global country is accepting it, then why can't we ask?
I have a slightly skeptical view here. Again, so see, we are looking at this based on how a few people are reacting to this, right? But if you look at how crypto used to be maybe 2 years back, it is no longer the global phenomenon it used to be. Right? People have pulled out, so you need a lot of people to come back to active trading. For instance, in India, it's very tough now to be actively involved in crypto, because, like, because of the taxation and all of that. And, like, and again, a country accepting crypto is not new. I think the first country was El Salvador about 2.5 years back, right? It's not done anything, right? So I think unless it's going to become a mass thing, and again, see, Musk has the power to talk it up, right? He can just talk up and get people to come back to this. But yeah, but as of now, I don't think maybe my views will change in a year or so. But right now, I don't think that's happening.
The original premise for Bitcoin was that it will eventually replace currencies. Over a period of time, at least that assumption has gone away. That it's not going to be the currency of choice to be eventually adopted by countries with policy support. That is unlikely. Exceptions being small sort of countries like El Salvador, where it's obviously not taken off. That's also because the currency that you and I use, there is an implicit guarantee. There is someone backing that up. Who backs this up? So then the alternative, the better alternative was countries that are indexed to cryptocurrencies that are indexed to say a currency like the dollar, or say a reserve like gold, or the value, a pegged cryptocurrency. But that also hasn't quite taken off. So this phenomenon where we're seeing Bitcoin having crossed $100,000 is also linked to the other thing that you mentioned, that the chap who's a pro crypto guy is now being made the SEC chair. So it's a cyclical thing. One thing is feeding the other. But as Nandu said, it is not a wide enough phenomenon. Will it become that over a period of time? We'll have to wait and see. But I also doubt it. I'm quite skeptical about that really happening. It is, you see, all of those who are invested in crypto have a vested interest to see that it goes up, and they're fueling it and they're working towards it. And in that, there is also Trump, because he's also part owner of a crypto firm. Then there is also Musk. This whole Doge thing was essentially, I think, named to mark the currency that he's been propounding. So it's a small pocket of vested interest that want cryptos to go up, and they're fueling it. How that pans out over a period of time will be tough. The other big thing that has happened in the interim is that multiple countries have also floated their own sovereign digital currencies. So we have our own CBDC. China has floated. It's a successful experiment. The Chinese e-yuan is a very, very successful experiment at a low scale, but it can be scaled up, and if they want, it can happen. Our CBDC experiment is also on the retail level is struggling, but at the wholesale level, it has seen some degree of traction in places like Bombay, for instance. Will it be scaled up? It's possible. If there are cryptocurrencies that come in and threaten them, there is a chance the RBI could decide to scale up the experiment. And there'll be sovereign push to all of this, which is what you and I want to look at if you're investing in something. Where does the buck stop? It stops at the RBI, which is backed by the sovereign. It's a there's a certain amount of certainty in the whole thing, which might be missing in case of these currencies. And that's really the thing. So I think the pool has shrunk, as Nandu said. And the shrunken pool does want to see it surge, and that's what they do.
So it's on the whole semiconductor thing with the Chips and Science Act 2022. So US is trying to domestically produce semiconductors, but since it has a concentrated supply chain, like we have ASML in Netherlands, where the lithographic technologies are produced. We have NVIDIA designed, and we have Taiwan TSMC, which is manufacturing it. Do you think US will be left far behind? Probably, still are far behind anyway. But if they adopt the strategy to manufacture the semiconductors domestically, because even in India we have the whole plan to manufacture it domestically, but with such a concentrated supply chain, do you think it is a possibility? Because many countries, including India, US, I'm sure European Union countries, are trying to de-risk China when it comes to our dependence on China on refining these critical minerals that are required for energy transition.
It's a strategic push that the US Chips Act, is all about. It's essentially bringing back chip manufacturing to mainland, America. Uh, Now, 10 years back, if you would have asked us if Intel would be in such a bad position that the head of the company would have to resign because of performance linked issues. I mean, that's just happened. Pat Gelsinger has had to put in his paper. The whole semiconductor business is one of the most closed, uh, sort of manufacturing cartels. You have just one company, ASML, as you said, it's a Dutch company that makes the EUV, the lithography machines that are needed to etch the design of the chip in the fab. There are some three fabs in the world, three fab companies. TSMC is one, UMC, then Samsung, who practically produce 90% of chips that are smaller than 10 nanometers. Uh, it's an incredibly difficult sort of manufacturing chain to get into, and if a country can get in, it's obviously US. I mean, they can easily do it. They've not done it, and they've sealed away the advantages to other countries. Now they're trying to wrest it back. To that extent, it's a strategic sort of a push, and I think that push will continue. I think there's bipartisan support in the US for that kind of stuff. Uh, Will India succeed? Well, it's tough because it is tough to get into chip manufacturing. It is tough to, the most complex thing that India would have manufactured. If we were to rank it on a scale of 1 to 10, this would be right up there, manufacturing a 10 nanometer chip. So we have one fab venture and two packaging ventures that are sort of taken off after a government push. How it pans out is something that we'd have to see. But it's, for us to get into the whole value chain, it is a long way off.
Because we are almost, the time is up. I would request you to kindly give me a closing remark each, uh, possibly on whatever we have discussed, and also the likely impact of all this on India.
I think it is a period of uncertainty that we're entering, but it presents an opportunity that we perhaps never had so far. You've never had the possibility of the US president, singling out a country that is essentially a rival to us in multiple ways, geopolitically, strategically, in terms of the industries that we want to get into, in terms of where we are on the economic, progress trajectory. It is important for us to maybe do what China did in some ways, maybe better what they've done in other things, maybe revise our strategies given the new realities that differ from what China faced when it started its process in the late 70s, early 80s. Things have changed now. Maybe the same manufacturing route is perhaps not the labor arbitrage route to manufacturing is perhaps not the best case scenario for us. And what is it that we can do differently is something that we need to think about. And Trump coming in does give us an opportunity. This China plus one strategy that a lot of countries have adopted post COVID, it has benefited some countries very clearly. Vietnam is one, Indonesia is one, Bangladesh for garments, textiles, etc. We've not really capitalized on that. But now if Trump were to go after China, it does present another opportunity. It's a question that we'd have to grapple with on how to take advantage of it. How do we mold our trade strategy and strategies on other things like strategic alignment, aligning with who, how we go about it. So all of those things are things that I see are potential opportunities. And look, tariffs again. I mean, tariffs is the most sort of cited thing, but tariffs is also, it works on a comparative basis. So if it's a 10% across the board tariffs on everybody, it's the same for in the sense we're not impacted. Then it is only if our competitor were to be slapped with a higher tariff that we actually can benefit, and that's the sort of benefit that we should perhaps be looking at. And I see it as a possibility. We'd have to see how it goes forward.
So on the technology front also, I think it's it's very interesting times because in a way there is a shift happening from, when you look at personal technology, for instance, and other technology, a shift happening away from China, right? Because it's sort of forged towards US. And if you look at the biggest trend in the tech world right now, which is AI doesn't have a very strong China footprint, right? And if you see, for instance, the second level of technology that's come. So if you look at AI devices, none of the AI devices have so far come out of China, right? They have come out of the US. They've not been successful, like the human pin and all of that. So with this thing, push happening and all of that, there is a possibility that the next big wave of tech innovation might be again US driven, right? But on the other side, Trump's relationship with the tech companies is not really good, right? Because he also thinks that they are very anti-Trump in their political leaning. It's very California, it's very it's very left liberal, all of that. So how he's going to, whether he's going to crack down and all of that in some way or the other, or at least make life difficult for them, you don't know. The other thing is, from a very India specific angle, if you look at it, US suddenly is competition for us, right? And let's say when at a time when Apple is moving a lot of its manufacturing to India, and it's being very successfully, and it's also moved the latest product manufacturing to India now, and at that time when it's also under pressure to bring manufacturing back to US, right? So it can't say, it doesn't make sense for it to have manufacturing in different parts of the world and making the same thing. And again, see, look at the cost of manufacturing in China. It'll be more expensive in India. It's going to be way more expensive in the US. So why would it make sense, right? So how that is all going to, how it's all going to play out now. Also look at it this way: if Trump is going to choke China, a lot of the Chinese companies are going to be choked. Most of the investment in India is from Chinese companies, right? Like Oppo and we are sitting in Greater Noida, right? Where all these guys have their manufacturing. So how is that going to impact? So we don't know. So again, interesting times, but also weird times. Yeah.
Look it from a American point of view. Trump focusing on his own country is also not bad. Just look at from a perspective as a president of a country. He's putting import duties on Chinese parts and all those things, but somehow he's trying to encourage the local industries to come up well. It's not that bad. I understand there are issues with it in the short term, but as somebody who is focusing on his own native, it's not bad. Second thing, technologically, I think what he said is very rightly. So the good part is exciting time. So because of AI, I would say that a lot of, okay, I'll take a different part here. I don't see much of a change in terms of who is going to be the top. The top 3-4 companies are going to be almost same in terms of who is going to lead the AI. But if you look at the small markets where you see the AI applications and technological applications, I think I have a fair part to say that India is going to lead in that particular area. You will see a lot of AI applications and use cases, even revenue models coming more from Indian landscape than you see from Europe or what you said, China. So it may not. What you said is right that US again will be the top, but I still see that the IT revolution which happened in 1970s, 80s. This time India will be at least the second or third or fourth, where when we say the kind of AI revolution is going to be. So I think the next 5-6 years is going to be exciting time for that.
So 5 minutes for questions, if any, from the audience.
Hello to all the panelists. I'm Adiraj, and it was truly an honor to listen to you all during this session. So my question is, like we have discussed, Trump's presidency is focusing on the domestic production and domestic business to enhance. So with that, the dollar's value will obviously go high because its own economy will be highly focusing on the domestic production. This will lead to India's own economy having to go down, which will lead to inflation because the imports will get expensive. So what's your take on it?
No, so this is a challenge that all countries in the world would be faced with, because the value of the dollar has already gone up, and it's showing up in the bond yields. The problem therein is that if for the US as well, um, this particular phase has been, you know, sort of signaling a changeover. So the bet on the dollar is primarily a bet on America first, which is what Trump has promised all along. But how that pans out is something that we'd have to see. Because if he were to also walk the talk on whatever else he said, including, say, removing illegal migrants from the US, slapping tariffs on imported items that come in from a majority of countries, all of that would essentially lead to higher inflation, which would essentially force the Fed, the US Fed, to in high, they have just entered a rate cutting cycle. They've just cut rates just now. They would now be forced to hike the rates to counter inflation. That would again impact the dollar. That would impact most other currencies in the world, because trade is pegged in dollars. The way the dollar moves, there would be a residual impact on other countries. But India is not the only one that's impacted. Practically most other countries would be impacted. That also serves as a backdrop for the warning that Trump has given, that if the dollar value were to be unrealistic, it would force most of the other countries to at least peg their bilateral trade in their respective currencies. So it could push the yuan, potentially, for at least whatever trade that China is undertaking. It could force a lot of the other countries to also look at that. So it's something that we'll have to wait and watch how that pans out. The immediate impact on the dollar, the surge that we've seen, is in keeping with what he's promised all along, and it's reacted to the slightly sort of unexpected election result. But that should temper off as we go ahead.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And we close this session. And on behalf of IILM University, Greater Noida, and all this awesome faculty and students and staff, I thank both of you for really visiting our campus and for this really enriching and thought-provoking conversation.